Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second Solar Plus podcast for September 2019. My name is Davey Newlove. I'm your host, and I'm here with our new co-host, Sarah Lozanova. Sarah, you weren't with us last month, so why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to all of us?
Yeah, my name is Sarah Lozanova. I live in Mid-Coast, Maine, and I have been working in the solar energy field since 2005. And it's something that I believe in strongly and I'm very passionate about. I have a BA in environmental studies and an MBA in sustainable business as well.
Yeah, and we're really excited to have you a part of the team. I know that we've had you a part of the team kind of off and on for about the past year and a half, and you've been a very valuable part of the team, and we appreciate having you on board.
Oh, thank you. I enjoy working with you guys.
So this month's podcast, we're going to talk about more of the solar policies, or a rather lack thereof solar policy at the federal level. And we will hit on the Green New Deal, and more specifically Bernie's plan for the Green New Deal, as it appears to be the most aggressive plan of attack. So right now there isn't really any federal policy for renewable energy, but there is the solar ITC. Can you tell me a little bit about the solar ITC?
Yeah, so this is the federal tax credit, and it's available for both residential and commercial projects, and actually for wind energy as well. And it basically is a tax credit, which is more lucrative than a tax write-off. It's a dollar for dollar tax credit off of taxes owed. And so it's a great opportunity for homeowners and for businesses to save quite a bit of money on their taxes by going solar. And so let's say you install a $20,000 solar system, then that system would qualify for a $6,000 tax credit. But that is scheduled to start tapering off. It's currently at 30%. It's going to go down by a few percentages points next year, and it'll zero out by 2020.
That's just right around the corner. And I know right now there's been a bill introduced in both the House and the Senate to extend the solar ITC. Do you think that there's really any real opportunity to see that extended?
Yeah, I mean, I think so that renewable energy is great for the economy. So there's, I think, a lot of reasons to support renewable energy. There's obviously the greenhouse gas emissions that we're concerned about, due to the climate crisis, but solar energy and wind energy as well really help the local economy by all the jobs that they create. So instead of us exporting so many of our energy dollars, either out of the region or out of the country, I think there's a lot of reasons to support renewable energy, even just for financial reasons.
Yeah, and I'm actually really glad that you hit on a couple of good ideas there, talking about the emissions, going to the Green New Deal now. I know one of the big goals of the Green New Deal is to cut down on all the carbon emissions and get to net zero. And net zero is basically the company offsetting the amount of carbon that they output. Can you tell me a little bit more about the net zero?
Yeah, the idea is it's basically it's a plan that's saying, hey, we're in crisis. What are we going to do? And so it identifies many different areas to address in order to just dramatically reduce emissions. And so one of the things that it looks at is the electricity and transportation sectors, and to really decarbonize those no later than 2030, and to completely decarbonize things by 2050 at the latest. But it also, it incorporates many things, like creating 20 million new jobs that are needed to address the climate crisis, public investment into infrastructure that would be needed, education, to retool the economy, because to make these things possible, we need an educated workforce that can bring that about. So it's a very it takes a very kind of comprehensive look at how to make things possible.
Yeah, and I know with the workforce, a lot of talk has been out there about, what are we going to do with the coal miners? When we're closing down these coal factories, are they just going to hit unemployment? And I know that there's a couple of ideas, and I know Bernie has this idea with Bernie's plan for a Green New Deal to have a compassionate viewpoint towards those workers to retrain them into the solar industry or renewable energies. Would something like that be a government-backed training, like government-funded training?
Yeah, under the resolution of the Green New Deal, and granted, this isn't a bill that has passed, it's more of a resolution or a suggested approach. But yeah, under the Green New Deal, it would specifically address this issue. And one of the concepts is that people with less access to education have fewer opportunities. And so the Green New Deal attempts to address this by helping to educate people so that people that work in fossil fuel industry, for example, can have these opportunities to switch over to work with clean energy or other technologies. So the concept is to not leave people behind, because a transition of this sort could have really major negative economic implications if these types of things aren't addressed. Then people with fewer opportunities can't, say, go back to school and get a 4-year degree because they wouldn't be able to afford to do that. So the Green New Deal attempts to address some of these types of issues so that it creates opportunity for all Americans.
That's really important because that makes it be more inclusive, which is really what you want with something like this. And to make the transition from the fossil fuel energy that we have now to renewable energy is going to require an all-inclusive transition.
Yeah, exactly. And the government would be in a position to help people. This is also one of the aspects of the plan that gets criticized because people say, well, this is socialism. But without somewhat addressing these things, I think people will get left behind. And under the plan, there's a guarantee for that will guarantee 5 years of a worker's current salary, housing assistance, job training, healthcare, pension support, and help with job placement for any displaced workers. And also an option for early retirement if they choose to continue working.
Yeah, and that's really important. We want to make sure that all the workers are taken care of because the workers are literally the backbone of our economy. Yeah,
and this is one of the things that can be a real challenge during transitions, and we've seen it before, for example, with technology replacing some jobs or things like that. People can get left behind due to change. And that is unfortunate, and it can disproportionately affect people that have fewer opportunities.
Right. So I know one of the policies, I guess you could call it, or one of the ideas in the Green New Deal, is talking about digitizing the nation's power grid. And now that's one thing I'm not terribly familiar about, as I'm still kind of fairly new to the solar industry myself. What is really digitizing the nation's power grid? What does that mean?
This isn't a concept that I'm super familiar with, but I know in the Obama era, there was a lot of talk about having a smart grid. And so that would impact things like being able to incorporate more renewable energy. For example, solar has a profile. So when there's more sun, there's more energy produced. There's also times where there's peak loads on the power grid, like often in the summer, for example, it's often in the afternoon when people are really cranking their air conditioning, or in areas where there's manufacturing where the plants are using more energy. So to my understanding, the concept is to make things as smart as possible. And there's even programs like through local utilities where rates vary depending on power demand, and even some people can opt to turn off their air conditioners or things like that to help reduce peak power. But one of the ideas is basically to figure out how to do things as intelligently as possible so that we can use as much clean power as possible, and to avoid turning on peaker plants. You know, like a lot of natural gas power plants just turn on when more power is needed. And even though natural gas is sort of touted as a clean fuel, especially if the natural gas is coming from fracked sources, it's not really all that it's cracked up to be, in my opinion. So if you can avoid using natural gas, it's also more expensive, so it's not optimum from a cost perspective either. And if you can use more renewables like wind and solar, which don't need fuel sources, then you can really help cut costs and improve efficiencies. So a lot of the moves towards digitizing and making things smarter incorporate these concepts.
Yeah, and I know in Bernie's plan for the smart grid, he's proposing a $526 billion investment to create a smart grid, which is a pretty hefty investment to ask of the American taxpayers, but I think it would definitely be worth it, and it should pay itself off over time.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we've invested so much money into things like pipelines that really benefit fossil fuels, but it doesn't seem like we've put nearly the investment into energy efficiency. And so if these things can really save energy, then they save energy year after year. And it seems like with the rise of digital technologies that just more and more things are possible. And so the more that we look into solutions, I think the more that we can cut carbon emissions and waste.
Yeah, and I know a couple minutes ago you real briefly mentioned fracking and getting energy from sources from fracking. And I know one of Bernie's plans for his Green New Deal is to completely outlaw and ban fracking, which I think is a great idea because fracking has shown to be very environmentally detrimental.
Yeah, and it's detrimental from many different perspectives too. Like methane from fracked natural gas is 86 times more powerful than carbon dioxide at trapping heat in our atmosphere. So we tend to think a lot about carbon dioxide emissions, but methane is an extremely potent greenhouse gas. And during fracking, there can be leaks in natural gas pipelines and wellhead leaks, and some of the chemicals that are used in fracking can contaminate groundwater. So it's not just carbon emissions that we're concerned about. When you look at the big picture of fossil fuels, a lot of times there's kind of this dirty underside that you don't see. And, if you dig into it a little bit more, you'll hear about communities where their wells are completely contaminated and they can't, they have to bring in bottled water now because of it, or things like that, where there's really a lot of other costs that are coming with some of these extraction methods.
And would Flint be one of the cities that would be kind of a victim to that, or is that something completely different?
Yeah, to my understanding, it is. And one of the things that's so troubling about that is that if you look at the racial makeup of Flint, it seems like there are people that have been marginalized, and that the situation hasn't been resolved in a positive way.
Yeah, and it's been years, that they've had this issue too, and the fact that it's still not resolved is kind of mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, and what I find really troubling is when you look at a lot of these issues, it tends to be minority populations and low income populations that are disproportionately affected. So it seems like a way to really, you know, wreak havoc on these communities, and they don't have the same resources. And having to buy bottled water if you don't own a car and you're on a really tight budget is a much bigger deal to somebody with a middle from a middle class household. So some of the impacts can be even more troubling. Or if there's less education, then these families might be less aware of the impacts that it might be having on their children or things like that. So I think it's very troubling from many perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to go back to one thing that we mentioned now quite a bit ago, but about the job creations from renewable energy or going green. I know Bernie's plan is calling for creating 20 million new jobs, and that's kind of an ambitious number. Do you think that is a feasible number or something that can really be done?
That's a great question, Davey. I haven't crunched the numbers, but I do know that solar is one of the biggest sources of new jobs right now. And one of the things about renewable energy is, like, for example, when you have manufacturing and then you have installation jobs, and even though solar doesn't really require a lot of maintenance, then you occasionally have technicians that are used to repair systems and things like that. And so because with solar there is a larger upfront investment than there is with just using power from the power grid, it does, like, that investment does really help the economy and create a lot of jobs. So I wouldn't doubt that is possible. And at the same time, I think other jobs will be lost. Like coal power production is going down. Like in 2019, they expect there to be, according to the EPA, there to be 4 gigawatts of coal power capacity retired. So, that also means that less coal needs to be extracted and transported around. And some of these jobs that are going to be lost aren't necessarily great jobs, especially from a health standpoint. So
Sure. Yeah, going down into the coal mines is quite a health hazard right there.
yeah, like the lung disease that some of these miners are facing is really troubling.
Yeah, and I know that, with the 20 million new job proposal, that wouldn't just be solar installs or technicians. You also got people that have to be marketing teams for these companies. People like me and you, that we do a lot of our work online and promoting, dealing with customers online, and writing and helping raise awareness of the industry. And that will be probably one other area where some of these jobs may come from as well.
Yeah, and transportation too, like electrifying transportation more, setting up EV charging networks, or high-speed rail, as I understand it, is a big part of this plan.
Yeah.
So, and if it's done right, I think many people would be happy to hop on a train instead of a plane if they could get there, in a similar amount of time and possibly for less money or in greater style and comfort. So there are many approaches to this plan that would require an investment and also people to make these things happen.
Yeah, it would be a investment in the infrastructure of the country. With the high-speed rail and stuff like that, we can look to Europe and what they do over there. That seems to be a pretty good mode of transportation in Europe, and a lot of people seem to be pretty happy with it.
Yeah, I've taken the bullet trains in Japan, and it's amazing how fast they go. And they're so comfortable. You can stretch out your legs and, read a newspaper, but on an airplane, it's so confining that you can, it's hard to really want to do much besides sleep on an airplane.
Right. One thing that we talked about a little bit briefly earlier as well was the subsidies for the fossil fuels. And I know Bernie's plan calls for completely cutting off all the subsidies and kind of well, not really cutting off, but more redirecting those subsidies instead of going to fossil fuels, going to renewable energies. How much money do you think that could really invest into the infrastructure of renewable energy?
Yeah, I mean, to my understanding, he's planning to both cut these subsidies and even go after fossil fuel companies for damages. And so if that's done, it's as I understand it, the fossil fuel industry just gets billions and billions of dollars. And then if you look at it from a market perspective, like in a free market, we would be, it alters basically how our market functions, because if fossil fuel companies are given subsidies, and then if they don't have to pay for the true environmental cost of their energy, then it artificially lowers their prices. Like, for example, if we're developing pipelines that benefit fossil fuel companies disproportionately, then it lowers the cost of the energy that they're using. And then they also often don't pay the environmental cost of their product. Like, for example, coal power plants typically don't pay for the medical bills of children that get asthma in the area, for example, even though they might be causing those high rates, or largely contributing to it. So or a lot of times people with contaminated wells from fracking don't necessarily get compensated for that. So there's a lot of these kind of hidden costs that they're not paying as well. And so Bernie's plan, I guess, will start to address that and even look at them paying damages, which we're seeing with this, with the opioid crisis right now too.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example to show right there. And it's really important too. We have to hold these companies accountable for what they do. If we don't hold them accountable, they're just going to continue to run wild with it and say, "Hey, no one's going to care. Let's just go and do whatever we want." And that's just really bad policy.
Right, and it really shapes the country quite a bit. And I think fossil fuel companies have had so much lobbying in Washington as well, and that really shapes policies and bills that are supported or not supported, and verbiage that's put in or not put in. So so Bernie's plan attempts to address those things.
Sure. And do you foresee any real future federal policy on renewable energy? Because I know right now it's just literally kind of the Wild West, and a lot of the policies are up to state. But do you really see kind of a more federal policy standard coming into play anytime soon?
Not I haven't really been following it that closely, not that I'm aware of. One thing that's happened recently, and to my knowledge, it doesn't seem to have gotten that much attention, but it does affect the fossil or the solar energy industry, is the bonus depreciation for commercial solar energy systems. And that was made at the end of 2017. And it impacts the tax benefits available to businesses that purchase and install solar energy systems. And it's under the Tax Cuts and Job Act. And basically, Congress doubled the amount of bonus depreciation that can be claimed for solar energy projects. And businesses can apply for 100% depreciation of the expense of the solar system in year one, instead of spreading it out over 6 years. So that's the only really encouraging news that I've heard recently, but it isn't something that I follow very closely.
So, with the solar tax credit, would that also apply to battery storage, or is it just for the solar panel installations itself?
Yeah, my understanding is that it's the total cost of the solar system. So at least right now, how the tax credit works is it includes, the solar panels, the mounting hardware, paying the installers, the whole deal. So that does include battery storage.
And that's a big selling point too, which I know for us at the solar company here in Atlanta, here at Solar Plus, we're seeing a real uptick in customer in customer inquiries, and we're closing on more deals due to the expiring solar ITC. So it's right now is the best time to go solar. Right now is it.
Yeah, and in different parts of the country, there's different reasons why battery storage can make sense. In areas like California, where some of the rates are really high, or in Hawaii, sometimes it makes sense for economic reasons, because then people don't have to use the more expensive grid power at night. In areas that are prone to storms or things like that, like in Puerto Rico, a lot of people are looking at battery storage to help avoid the effects of hurricanes. Up here in the Northeast, we can get some pretty wicked storms, especially ice storms that can cause trees to break and wreak havoc on the power grid. So in different areas of the country, there's kind of different reasons why battery storage can make sense.
Yeah, and I know one big one in California is the wildfires, and that's kind of come more to the forefront, especially PG&E, especially after the Paradise Fire last year. That just was absolutely devastating.
Yeah, and I think my sense is that we're going to see more of this with the climate crisis. It might vary in different areas, but things like hurricanes and flooding, the Midwest had a lot of flooding, heat waves where it can cause brownouts or even blackouts when people just really crank their AC. So with a less stable climate, I think we're going to see even more of these types of issues that do impact the power grid and its reliability.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Sarah, thank you for being on the podcast this month, and we'll look forward to having you back next month. And for now, we'll go ahead and turn the podcast over to Don Tonic, and he will have an interview with John Hitchins. All right, thank you. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. This is Don Tonic, the founder of Solar Plus, here with our special guest for the podcast for the month. I'm going to introduce everyone to someone that's been a real proponent for policy change here in Georgia. And without further ado, his name is John Hitchins. John, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Don. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Yeah, we really appreciate you coming on. We're going to go through a couple of questions, kind of get your feedback on some things. But before that, I just wanted to let all the listeners know that, ironically, I met John 20 years ago as him and I both worked for a barbecue catering company here in town. That is, they're still great. I love those dudes. But what's funny is you were like the GM at the time, right? What was your title?
I was operations manager.
Yeah, you were like the big dog over there. And, part of the reasons that I have my own business today is because, like, honestly, like 80 to 90% of all the bosses I had, I didn't like, nor did I respect, for various reasons. But you were in that 10% category of bosses that was always cool and like level-headed. And I don't think I ever remember you yelling once or, flying off the handle. I remember making things happen when it needed to, but you're always real tactful about it.
Honestly, to tell you the truth, a lot of that came from the owners above me. They kind of led by example. They were ones who would jump in when things needed to be done. So it's kind of one of those deals where you definitely felt like you better be able to do it without just telling someone else to jump in. Like, you better lead by example. So I was there for a lot of years, met a lot of great folks like yourself.
Yeah. Right.
And love crossing paths with them decades down the line and seeing, being surprised and finding out what they're up to. And I like we did when we crossed paths at the Spin of the Solarized Atlanta event. So that was a pleasant surprise.
Indeed, Johnny and Bennett, if you guys are listening, we'll actually send a link to Bennett. So we'll send shouts out to those guys. But if you want to move forward and explain how you went from there to, barbecue operations guy to where you are today.
Yeah, that was, like you said, that was a great small company, and I had started working there in college, and then just it was, great people, good money at the time, and it just you worked hard, it was a good place to be.
Yeah.
And but I had not really intended on being in the hospitality or catering business, and so as I started getting a little older and started looking at what I thought would be more career oriented, I found myself working in nonprofit with the Nature Conservancy here in Georgia, and just doing some fundraising, special events, things of that nature. And that conservation was something that had really been a part of my family, for a long time. And it had been ingrained in me, especially from my grandmother. And so having the opportunity to do something in that field was really inspiring. And there's a lot of great work being done right here in Georgia, which is, it's my home state. And it's a beautiful state, from the mountains to the coast to the agriculture fields to the city of Atlanta. There's just a lot to have here, and there's a lot worth protecting. And so I spent some time there. I spent some time at the Georgia Aquarium doing some program management, and then actually back to the Nature Conservancy in Georgia, and then have been doing some contract work with Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, which is where we met.
Oh yeah,
where we crossed paths while I was there doing solar advocacy, primarily for Solarize Dunwoody and then Solarize Atlanta, and then also did some contract work with Georgia conservation voters on the plant mogul issue. So most recently, kind of been talking about the coal ash issue and the IRP that just went through, which I know we'll touch on.
Yeah, I was going to ask you some questions about that stuff for sure. So yeah, like what in particular, or who in particular kind of influenced you to really like who are some of the people that sort of gave you the idea that you could do what they were doing? Like, who's some of your heroes?
Really, and this can sound cliche, but I think it started with my grandmother. She grew up a baby of the Depression, an orphan of the Depression. And, I don't know if the word conservation was really used then, but it was more just being frugal. They had to make the most with what they had. And I think that even once, she was married, had children, had grandchildren, you still kind of saw that ethic in her, from just little things, from recycling when recycling was still very in its infancy, to reusing. Mostly you'd see her reusing everything and anything, and so that just kind of became a part of our, just kind of like I said, ingrained in our DNA. And when I was younger, my dad was a pilot, so we had the opportunity to visit a lot of wonderful places, especially in the United States.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so we went to a lot of national parks as a family, and I kind of looked at that. If somebody took the time to set aside this natural wonder, this beautiful landscape, so they could be protected for generations, and that's kind of what inspired me. I'd like to be able to help in some way like that as well, as to be able to protect something down the line, to be sure that it's here for generations to come, that we don't look at it in a short-sighted way. And, once you pave it over, once you build it up, once you tear it down,
that's it.
Yeah. So she's really what inspired me the most. She was a lot into advocacy as well. She actually volunteered when Jimmy Carter was governor, and volunteered in his office, and helped in his campaign when he ran for president. And so I think I, unbeknownst to me, kind of picked up a lot of that advocacy side of it. And then outside of that, a lot of it also kind of came from my faith. And I kind of made that connection between faith and creation, and that's kind of protecting it. And that also came from our founding pastor at our church, who was one of the first to kind of connect those dots between creation and conservation. And he was one of the first board members for Georgia Conservancy when they were founded a little over 50 years ago. And so again, it's kind of something that to me has always been there, has always made sense. Like I hadn't really needed to be taught it recently, or be, the explanation between, climate change or this, that, or the other. To me, it's always been about taking care of what we got. So
nice. Well, you mentioned the national parks, and if any of the listeners haven't really gotten to see some of them around the country, I mean, it's really just stunning. Yeah, they've been protected for almost 100 years now. But I like that you mentioned that there's a lot of spots here in Georgia that definitely should be protected, and things like coal ash can really and already has made a difference towards the negative.
And they can be it can have a long-term impact, and I think that's the thing is, you got to look at it that way, and that's what concerns me when we get to that issue. And I don't want to jump ahead, but you can't make short-sighted decisions, because once the genie's out of the bottle, some cases you can never get it back. So we got to be sure we do it right the first time.
Yeah, and those areas are so rural that there's really not a lot of voices to defend them. It's really easy for the big giant corporations to just go in the remote areas and rural areas and sort of get away with things that they maybe couldn't here in this. But at the same time, they've been dumping ash over there in McDonough, right underneath Smyrna, for 50 years. So.
I was about to say, yes, I think a lot of
maybe they can.
Environmental inequity is an issue, and right here in Smyrna, we're facing this new issue with this steringetics. I don't know if you've heard of that in the news, but it's a medical sterilizing, or a medical device sterilizer that uses a gas called ETO, or ethylene oxide. Nobody even knew this plant existed right here in Smyrna. Well, that's actually just outside of Smyrna, literally next door to Plant McDonough. Their property is adjacent to it. And even as someone who's been in conservation and advocacy in this area, I'd never heard of it until a WebMD article popped up.
That's nuts. So they could hide it from all of us, like right under our noses.
So, it like you say, there a lot of times they push these things off to rural areas where people don't have a voice, but in some cases it's right under your nose. And like you say, that Plant McDonough, it's been right there. I grew up in Vinings and now live in Smyrna.
Crazy. That's right there. So that's right in your backyard, man.
Yeah. And I've been looking at that. I looked at that coal ash tower my entire childhood. That was, like if I looked towards the city of Atlanta, that was part of the skyline. Yeah. And then they tore it down and it became a natural gas. And nobody really took into consideration what was, people hadn't really heard of coal ash.
And you remember the smokestacks over there that were always spewing off the clouds?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And it's one of those things as a child, and I'm sure my parents really didn't give it much consideration because, back then in the 80s, not really many people had too much knowledge of some of that stuff. But, now we look back on it and I wonder, boy, living a mile away from a coal-fired plant, hope everything's, is okay. And those are the ones we know. What about the places like this new one that's popped up that pumping stuff in the air that we just all found about? So it's concerning, but the goal is to make people aware. That's my biggest thing. And sometimes people get tired of hearing about it. They feel like kind of the sky is falling is a little bit too much, but my goal really is to focus on Georgia and is to try to make it better. A lot of times when you look at things like climate change and stuff of that nature, it can seem very big and very daunting. But if we look at just Georgia, just the city of Atlanta, just regional, we can make differences, and then that can all add up. So
for sure. I wanted to get your feedback on what's the latest in the coal ash fight here in Georgia. What's where are we at with it, and what's been the most latest? I know that part of the IRP we'll touch on in a minute as well, but was about what they should do with the ash, and that they basically the PSC gave them the green light to charge the customer the rate base. Am I right?
Right.
To clean it up.
Well, and that part's coming up. But yes, that'll definitely be built into the new rate. Is paying for the cleanup, and you know, look, we all enjoyed energy. We all
Exactly.
used energy.
We all, but they made money from it.
They made money from it, and this isn't an issue where I'm saying they should necessarily be at fault for having coal ash. I mean, they provided a service that we, but what we've got to do now is, in my opinion, is make sure that ash is properly disposed of, and that's the crucial thing. And Georgia Power right now is saying the same thing that all the power companies around the Southeast, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, all of them have said this. Well, it's very expensive to do it in lined pits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it's also very expensive to have to pay for, environmental restoration and lawsuits and things of that nature should those pits, end up emptying into waterways or something of that nature. And we've seen that. We saw that in North Carolina when the Hurricane Michael, one of the hurricanes hit last year. It breached a lot of the
all the cow poop and the coal ashes and all that stuff.
Yeah,
huh?
And so when the flooding happens, and there's some down in South Georgia near the coast from Hurricane Julian that they were keeping an eye on as the tide rose. In Kingston, Tennessee, 10 years ago, they're still cleaning up from a coal ash spill that happened up there. So, we're going to have to pay for it, and it may be expensive. And as you say, they made a lot of money off it, so it's a little bit frustrating that's how that works.
Yeah, don't they have it in the bank still? Can't they just, sign a check?
You would think, but my biggest thing is let's do it right. So they want to, in a lot of cases, and Plant McDonough is one.
Just leave it.
Piling it up, and then they'll cover it up, and that'll be it.
Leave it. And that's right next door to Chattahoochee, of all one of the biggest rivers.
Right next door to Chattahoochee.
Right next door to the Chattahoochee.
That's what they claim is the real expensive part, is to excavate it, line the pits, and then bring it back and dump it. Well, the big concern there is you have no idea, if there's leaching that's occurring. I mean, the wells on site at Plant McDonough, Georgia Power themselves have reported on their wells there, and it's incredibly toxic, the water in those wells. Now they claim that that's not, it's not leaving the property, but that's you want to make that same promise for 100 years. I mean, this is a long-term issue, long past any of us. And whether it leaks 5 years from now or whether it leaks 100 years from now, any sort of leak it can be devastating. We got to do what we can to prevent it. So the latest on it was the Georgia EPD was trying to get control over that decision making from the EPA. A lot of us went down and testified in front of the EPA as to why we thought that would be a bad idea. Oklahoma currently is the only state in the union who actually has permission to handle coal ash the way Georgia's trying to. The biggest reason is there's a lot of distrust of the EPD in Georgia to begin with, that they don't manage things necessarily in favor of the citizens of Georgia, that they are more in line with corporate America, and that they'll do what's best for business. The second, to me, what should be the biggest concern is there's currently no one on staff of EPD who's qualified to handle testing of these coal ash sites. So, there's a lot of questions of how do you plan on paying for this? How do you plan on handling this? Are you going to hire new staff? Well, your budget's been cut. So, they didn't have answers to that. So to me, it's until they do, I don't have a whole lot more faith in the EPA, but I'd much rather them kind of keep an eye on it. But if Georgia EPD gets to make the decision, I'm pretty sure they'll decide in favor of Georgia Power and let them keep it as is. And like you say, it's right there on the banks of the Chattahoochee. It could be a slow leak, which is bad, or it could be a major bust and
just a gaping hole, or if the river started flooding and the banks ran over there, then it's just going to wash right back.
Yeah.
So it is a potential, big time hazard, not only there, but, I think that there's 7 or 8 other big pits out here in the state that you guys are advocating for. And I think that's cool. I want to keep it moving. And I wonder if real quick, you could just give us a quick synopsis of what the PSC is here in Georgia.
Yeah. So the PSC, the Georgia Public Service Commission,
right,
are the elected officials nobody knows about. That would probably be how I'd describe that, except for folks in the solar industry or possibly in the utility industry. But Public Service Commission are essentially the ones in charge of regulating electricity, communications, and gas. And Georgia Power, being a regulated monopoly,
right,
basically decisions that are made on their behalf go through the Public Service Commission. So,
Indeed.
A lot of folks don't know who these people are. They don't understand how it works. There's 5 of them. There's 5 commissioners from the state of Georgia. They're in districts. So basically, the idea is that there's geographical representation. So the idea behind that was you don't end up with 5 commissioners all from the city of Atlanta, that you have interests represented all over the state. However, when you vote, you don't just vote for the person in your district. You actually have, you vote for the commissioners all over. So they go on a rotating basis. So in 2018, the two incumbent service commissioners were reelected, and then 2020 will be have 2 more going up. Jason Shaw and the chairman, Bubba McDonald, will be running for reelection.
Yeah, man.
Will be another one. So
we could, easily spend an hour talking about coal ash and the PSC and the structure, and boy, would I love to. But I wanted to let everyone know that this last term, John Hitchins actually ran for one of the chairs, and actually did pretty good, campaign all over the state. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so while I was working in Solarize Atlanta, some of the folks, the chairman of the PSC, Stan Wise, who'd been on for a long time, was stepping down. The governor, he stepped down just prior to the end of his term, and the governor got to appoint his replacement. And then, of course, his replacement got to run as an incumbent, and she happened to be in the district that I live in. And I had a lot of folks from the Solarize Atlanta coalition say, "Have you ever thought about running for office?" And no, I hadn't. But
crazy.
They kind of pushed me to say, this isn't really the way it should work. And because the IRP was coming up, and because of the Plant Vogel situation, which was, there's another one we could go into for an hour. But basically,
Seriously.
Plant Vogel was coming up. A decision was needed to be made, and both seats for the Public Service Commission went down to the wire in November. I ran in the primary against Nathan Deal's appointment, Tricia Clydemore.
Yeah.
Basically, to give people a voice, because I felt like him picking her and then her just getting to run again isn't really giving the people a choice in how the process works. So it was a very amazing experience, to be honest with you. Running statewide is daunting, to say the least.
Yeah,
it's a big state. But
it is a big state.
I'm really glad I did, especially got to go down to South Georgia and hear kind of some of their issues. And
the farmers.
There's a lot of folks down there. They don't understand what the PSC does. They don't understand who they are, but they had issues. And it turned out they were with the Public Service Commission. They mostly thought they were with their legislators. But when I went down there, I didn't get to talk a whole lot about my platform. Most of my time spent was simply explaining what the PSC does and who they are and why you need to care. And once they realize that these are the people in charge of their energy bills, these are the people in charge of telling Georgia Power, that they need to allow more solar. And we'll talk about net metering coming up, but there's a lot of farmers who want to install solar on their property, but we're finding out that it wasn't that Georgia Power is kind of weighted against them, and that it wasn't financially reasonable. It wasn't, it wasn't an easy process for them because of the way the system's set up, and they were frustrated by that, but they didn't really know who
to
was
be
responsible
frustrated.
for making that change.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So real quick,
I got to meet a lot of wonderful people, and hopefully we just began to scratch the surface on explaining to them what the PSC does and why it really matters, and people will start paying attention.
well, hopefully when it comes up, you run again, and we'll lend our support as well. Real quick, I mean, what have you learned about the PSC since then? What like maybe that only someone in the industry like yourself would know.
Gosh, I'll be. I want to be very strategic in what I say because
yeah.
They are making decisions, and you don't want to. But I found to be a lot of thin skin that for politicians who are elected statewide, I think generally they like flying under the radar. They kind of have enjoyed being anonymous, and all of a sudden a lot of decisions that they've been making over the years was being brought into light, and you could see a lot of uncomfortableness with it because there's a lot of defensiveness. And then the thought was, if you're so defensive about what decisions you've made, why is that? Why you should be able to stand behind it very easily. But I have also noticed in some cases some willingness to kind of be a little more open. And to have more communication. I think the results of the two races in the fall of 2018 being very close. One of them went into a runoff between Chuck Eaton and Lindy Miller.
I remember that.
So I think that kind of opened their eyes that we better start really hearing what people say because they're
paying attention now, right?
Yeah, and if we want to keep our jobs, so there's a couple of them that I feel like have been a lot more attuned to what people who disagree with some of their decisions, but are willing to have good conversations, and I think that showed in the IRP, the integrated resource plan that just got approved this, early summer, late spring.
Okay, yeah, that was actually my next question. I wanted you to sort of, explain to the listeners real quick, what the IRP is and, what was your take on the outcome of the hearings?
Yeah, so every 3 years, Georgia Power will produce an IRP, which again is an integrated resource plan, basically for approval from the Georgia Public Service Commission. And it covers the gamut from decommissioning coal plants, where the energy sources are going to come from that Georgia Power is responsible for.
Right.
And Georgia Power initially wanted a lot less solar into it. And ultimately, I was pleased. I like to try to look at things as half full. There's more that can be done. And I think on your end, on your business end that you work on, I think you definitely can see that there's more that can be done. But we did get a lot of solar put into the plan. So
utility scale
solar, correct. So over 2,000 gigawatts. So that's great. That's great.
Yeah,
and so you kind of want to take that and say, this is great. This is great momentum. And instead of nitpicking about some of the stuff you didn't get that you maybe wanted, say, let's build on this and try to be positive about it. And otherwise, there'll be a sense of ungratefulness. But I think the key thing there between solar is, honestly, in my opinion, before we came on air, you and I talked about subsidies. I think, in my opinion, if you were just to even everything out, take away the subsidies from solar, from gas, from oil, all of it, I think solar would win hands down. I think, it shows that It's bringing jobs to the market. People would like solar. They like the idea of, not having emissions falling down on raining down on their heads or polluting their waters. We're not at a place yet to where we can completely get off fossil fuels. We're not there yet, but we're moving in the right direction. And so from that standpoint, I think the IRP was a win, and I hope we can continue to build off it.
Well, that being said, companies like mine that primarily do distributed generation, or which is called behind the meter, which is essentially everything that is not utility scale, which is commercial and residential homes. They're supposed to be reviewing the Georgia solar industry really, took them to the hole in the hearings with, some real trying to get them to confirm where they got the data for their avoided cost rate. Basically, right now in Georgia, the net metering. So if you get a solar system, you have a commercial building or a residence, and you send your power back to the grid. Net metering is that they pay you a certain rate for the kilowatt hour that you're sending back to them. And Georgia Power has had a very low, what they call the avoided cost rate, that really has not benefited homeowners nor commercial owners. So we have been really trying, like you said, the IRP, there was a lot of positive stuff for distributed. We got swept under the rug again. So I just wanted to get your feedback on this, them reviewing that, the Georgia solar industry forced Georgia Power in the IRP to admit that their data was a trade secret. And the PSC has now mandated that they need to, by January, come up with that so they can give a ruling on that. So I wanted to get your feedback.
So again, I think cup half full. I don't think I would have expected even that out of the IRP if you'd asked me prior. So I look at that as a win. The fact that we're even going to take a look at it, that it's going to be considered, and I think that Georgia PSC, I think the commissioners are understanding now that people are paying attention. And they're shining a light on it, and you can't hide behind ignorance or just trade secrets or things of that nature. Like, it's got to be on the up and up. And it may be incremental baby steps. It may not be a rate that you and I think is fair right off the bat, but I think there may be some improvements there. Yeah. Which opens the door for more improvements down the line. So the fact that it's even above the table at the moment, I take that as a win. I think there'll be a lot of people who are going to hold their feet to the fire when this comes up, and if any of these numbers are funny or just don't add up, they'll mention it and they'll say that's not the way it is. And I think Jason Shaw, who is the newest member, can be very influential on this, because it kind of seems to be falling right now, whereas you've got Commissioner McDonald and Eccles, who are really pro-solar. And then Eaton and Pridemore, who are kind of indifferent, I would say, more.
In the middle, yeah. They're not really weighing in either, I'd say.
And I feel like Shaw can be the big difference there. And again, going back to those conversations that I used to have with farmers, this affects them too. Like you said, residential or commercial, a lot of them would put solar on their land, either to help offset their operational costs, or in some cases, if their land's not producing crop or the crop's not making money, they could produce energy. But with it being bought back at such a low rate, it's not profitable to them. So I hope that we can reach out to those folks, and they can reach out to Commissioner Shaw and maybe help influence that process. So I got my fingers crossed. And we'll keep our lights on them, and we'll make sure they know that we're not going away. And if they think they can sweep you guys under the rug, well, they're really mistaken, and then they'll be extremely sad in 2020 when 2 more elections come up. So,
indeed, and on that note, what's the best way that Georgia residents can actually make a difference if they care? What's the easiest steps for them to take?
Well, obviously, the biggest difference in any issue is to vote. is to vote. And pay attention to vote, and don't. To me, the commissioner, public service commissioners, is nonpartisan as it gets. And too often we have people voting Republican and Democrat. Find out about the candidate for the commissioner. Find out where they stand on those issues that matter to you, whether it's gas, energy, solar, whatever it is. And be sure to vote the right way, not just party line. And secondly, is to reach out to them. I mean, they will take into consideration what people are thinking, and I feel like that is helping to sway their opinions. Is they do represent Georgians, and they represent the interests of Georgians. They're supposed to find that balancing act between the utility and Georgians, and what's the best for both. But they need to hear you. So reach out to them. There's 5 of them. Reach out to all 5 of them and let them know where you stand on this, and that you're going to be paying attention, and that you'll hold them accountable when their terms come up.
All right, Georgia residents, you hear that? We're putting you on blast. If you care about your energy bill today and tomorrow, reach out to us. We will send you all the info you need on them. Do a Google search. Educate yourself on the process, and go solar. What can I say?
Yeah, and I got a Facebook page from my campaign days that I then converted. It's called Georgians for Energy Freedom, and I kind of do updates on that to help people. A lot of folks who followed me on the campaign, to kind of keep them abreast as to what the Public Service Commission's up to and energy policy in the United States and in Georgia. So people are welcome to go there and follow that, and obviously follow you guys, and just stay up to date. It's always swiftly moving, but it matters. They're your bills.
Yeah.
You pay them every month. It's your dollars.
Indeed. Now, is that the best way to get a hold of you? Or, is that how people can find you?
Georgians for Energy Freedom on Facebook is. I got a lot of posts up there, and just kind of keep information flowing.
Cool, man. Well, there you have it, everyone. We're going to wrap it up and leave you with that. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in, and big thanks to Mr. Hitchins here.
Don, thank you much. We'll get a barbecue sandwich together soon.
Oh, yeah. We're going to go queuing, buddy. All right.
Always a pleasure. Hope to see you soon.
Okay, I'll talk to you soon, John. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
I could be like the other boys, but I was never gonna. No, I was doing fine in '89, hanging out with the girls, listening to Madonna. Yeah, I was hanging out with the girls, listening to Madonna. Listening to Madonna.